Entrepreneurship. Welcome to ENRich 2018. As we
चाहिए एनर्जी सस्टेनेबल होनी चाहिए। भारत दुनिया की प्राइमरी एनर्जी की सिर्फ 6% कंजम्पशन करती है। आने वाले 25 साल में विश्व की इंक्रीमेंटल ग्रोथ की 25% भारत में ही उसकी कंजम्पशन होगी। एनर्जी एक सोशियो इकोनॉमिक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन की द वीपन है। मेरे सारा विषय पे एनरिच पॉलिसी डोमेन में एनरिच करें।
May I welcome the Honorable Minister to join us on the stage. May I also request my colleagues Akhil Bansal, Nitin Athrole and Nilay Verma to please join on the stage. So as you would have noted, the Honorable Minister has been in ENRich before, at least on 2 earlier occasions. We know that today is not the easiest of days to be over here, but he's taken his time out. We're really thankful for that. He's been a great inspiration for us, and I might share over here that in the last 3 to 4 years, there have been so many landmark policy changes which have transformed the energy space, especially in oil and gas. And we have had the opportunity and the good fortune to work very closely with the ministry, the entities, the PSUs, and the minister himself. And he's been really inspirational. This is not an easy area. There's a lot of legacy, but the way we have unwinded a lot of the legacy is something remarkable. I cannot for a moment say that this is the end of the journey, and I don't think the minister himself says he's been telling us to look forward and find newer ways of doing things. He's also been inspiring us on the digital agenda, which, and one of the things which we have set up upstairs is the digital lounge. A lot of those initiatives have been kind of encouraged by what we have seen happening from him. An amazing eye for detail. So he was not from the sector 4 years back, but the way he has an eye for detail is sometimes not just surprising, but also inspiring for us. He's given us a lot of thoughts, a lot of inspiration, and more than anything, he has been a kind of, if I can use the term, a patron for ENRich. May I commend to you the Honorable Minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan. So,
नमस्कार फ्रेंड्स, श्री अखिल बंसल, डेप्यूटी CEO KPMG in India, श्री नितिन अटोले, KPMG India office, Nilay Verma, my good friend, Anish De, another good friend of mine, distinguished delegates, friends from media. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to be with you this morning at this 9th edition of KPMG flagship event, ENRich, dedicated for the energy and natural resource. I'm happy to see the vibrant gathering of senior energy professionals and experts in this edition of Enrichment. Friends, if we look at the global economy, we find that although the global economy has got a lot of traction on the path of recovery, however, its momentum in the recent past have been affected by the winds of trade war, geopolitical risks, political fractures, debt-related risks, and vulnerability in the financial markets. Given this context, it is encouraging to see a strong spot in India's growth supported by a slew of policy measures and structural reforms undertaken by Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji to address the critical problems of stimulating and stabilizing the economy. We strongly believe that the Indian growth story remains credible, riding on the back of political stability, a commitment to fiscal consolidation, and key structural reforms that have made India a bright spot in the global landscape. As per the IMF World Economic Outlook data, India is expected to grow at the 7.3% in 2018 and 7.4% in 2019, surpassing China, which will grow at a 6.6 and 6.2% respectively in the next 2 years. Over the medium term, India's growth is expected to gradually rise with a strong private consumption and continued implementation of structural reforms that raise productivity and incentivize private investment. The IMF chief economist Maurice has said that India's growth has been very solid over the past 4 years, praising the fundamental economic reforms like GST, insolvency and bankruptcy code carried out by Modi government. He also added that significant work has been done for the financial inclusion. India has emerged as the world's 6th largest economy and 3rd largest by purchasing power parity. Soon it is set to leapfrogging Britain to become the 5th largest economy. We are determined to make India a global economic leader. India has made a remarkable jump in World Bank's ease of doing index from 142 in 2014 to 77 in 2018. This rapid jump in the ease of doing index is a reflection of India's journey from red tape to Prime Minister Modi's led maximum governance and minimum government. We are determined to further improve business climate in India. Energy is a key enabler in supporting India's economic growth and seeing to fruition of the aspiration of the growing middle class. Currently, we are the 3rd largest energy consumer in the world after US and China. Our energy demand would grow 3-fold in 2040. According to BP Energy Outlook, India will be key driver of global energy demand in next 25 years. Energy is a key driver of economic growth, and thus our government's focus has been to bring about transformational change in the energy landscape of India to fulfill the twin objective of energy justice and climate justice. The Indian energy sector is at the herald of a new beginning with the energy vision laid down by Honorable Prime Minister. The 4 energy pillars, energy access, energy efficiency, energy sustainability and energy security, has to be seen tandem for a stable energy future. The Petroleum Ministry has endeavored to reform, perform and transform the sector. In a span of 4 years, our government has taken several reforms and accomplished major tasks with far-reaching impacts. Under COP21, our government has made voluntarily commitment to reduce the emission intensity of GDP by 33% by 2030 as compared to 2005 levels. Moving towards gas-based economy is a critical step towards achieving COP21 targets. Largest ever rollout of city gas distribution network across India to enable inclusive growth. Up to 2014, only 66 districts in the country were covered under city gas distribution. Work on 174 districts has begun, which will further expand to cover 400 districts in next 2-3 years, covering 70% of population and 52% of the geography. The work is underway on 2600 km long Jagdishpur-Haldia Bokaro-Dhamra pipeline project, also known as Pradhan Mantri Urja Ganga project. This project is being further extended from Barauni to Guwahati for connecting the other areas of northeast with the gas grid. Approximately 13,000 crore will be spent on these projects. In order to connect northeastern states with gas grid, Indradhanush Gas Grid Limited has been firm to lay 1500 km pipeline with an investment of 6,000 crore. The work on the new LNG terminals of Ennore in Tamil Nadu and Hemara in Odisha at the cost of 10,000 crores are under progress in speedy manner, and soon these would become the hub of supplying imported gas to the eastern and southern states of the country. Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana has transformed the life over 6 crore poor women. We have given additional 12.5 crore LPG connection in the last 4 years. Our LPG coverage today to 90% from 55% in 2014. Ujjwala Yojana has brought about multiple positive benefits in the form of health, economic empowerment and environmental benefits. According to a recent study carried out by the Indian Council of Medical Research on the impact of air pollution on death, disease and life expectancy, it is estimated that there were 6.7 lakhs deaths due to outdoor air pollution and around 5 lakhs deaths due to indoor domestic pollution in 2017. The study has recognized the positive outcome of government initiative of Ujjwala Yojana and its huge potential to reduce the use of solid fuels. World Health Organization has also recommended the LPG meets in the international standard and can be an important source in reducing domestic air pollution. The ICMR report also appreciates the government drive to make the village smoke-free under Ujjwala Yojana. Our efforts towards clean energy is widespread and vast. Government has launched a scheme to produce bio-CNG by setting up 5,000 bio-CNG plants in the next 5 years. This plan will not only help tackle the problem of agricultural waste burning, but also bring monetary benefits to farmers. Our government has made significant increase in ethanol procurement price for blending program to support sugarcane farmers. Ethanol blending has gone up significantly from 38 crore litres in 13-14 to 150 crore litres in 17-18. Work is also underway to establish 12 modern biorefineries at a cost of 10,000 crore to produce second generation ethanol. We don't intend to achieve economic growth at the cost of environment and health of the people living in cities. We have taken a bold decision to directly leap forward to BS6 by 2020 from BS4. In fact, BS4 quality fuel has already been introduced in the national capital Delhi. BS6 quality of fuel has already been introduced in national capital Delhi from April 2018 itself. We realize that oil and gas are global commodities and pricing is largely linked to global trade markets. Our Prime Minister has at every international forum talked about a responsible pricing and balanced interest of buyer and suppliers. We have given the impulse to acquisition of development of overseas equity of oil and gas assets. Our recent efforts to jointly develop oil and gas projects in Russia, at Russia's Arctic Shelf and Okhotsk Seas during Russian President Putin's visit in a testimony of this. Our dwindling domestic oil and gas production is a concern. In 2014, when we took over the government, the exploration and production sector was confronted with several policy challenges and regulatory and operational issues. The government has made major changes to address this concern. We have undertaken the most transformative reform in the exploration and production sector by moving to a revenue sharing model and opening the entire sedimentary basin to investors through an open acreage licensing policy. We have also provided various relaxation under the existing PSC to provide adequate flexibility to operators to enable early development of discoveries. We believe that the digital transformation is a new normal for the industry, and as government we are playing our bit. As first step, we have set up centralized national data repository with visualization facilities for all the E&P data pertaining to the entire sedimentary of vicinal area. We have provided fiscal incentive to operators for adopting advanced techniques for enhanced recovery of oil and gas. We have provided completely marketing and pricing freedom to gas producers under HALE, DSF and CBM regime and higher prices ceiling for production from HPHT, deep water and ultra deep water fields. As a next step, we will soon be setting up a gas trading hub that will allow ease of access to gas suppliers and buyers to freely trade natural gas and in turn help India to develop its own hub-based pricing. The global investor industry is today keenly looking at India's energy sector as an attractive investment destination. About $300 billion would be invested in the coming decade. Asia's biggest green oil refinery cum petrochemical complex is being set up in the state of Maharashtra at a cost of about $40 billion by OMCs along with Saudi Aramco and ADNOC. Friends, the energy sector in India today is in the midst of the deep transformation and a complex interplay of various factors such as policy thrust and the low carbon pathways, changing consumers' preference, technological advancement, climate change issues, geopolitical uncertainty, and rising energy demand are causing disruption to energy business. I am happy that the sessions planned for the day will deliberate on these critical elements. I am sure that the agenda drawn up for the day would witness stimulating and thought-provoking deliberations. I would use this opportunity to place before this forum few questions that are on my mind. How can we reduce hydrocarbon imports in the coming years and work towards Prime Minister Modi's goal of reduction of import dependency by 10%? How can we increase the value addition in the energy chain, and what skill do you need to build for it? How can we expand the local entrepreneurial capabilities and bring in fresh blood into the sector? What measures can we rapidly increase the footprint of clean fuels like natural gas, hydrogen and renewables? How can the energy sector transform itself digitally? I see so much scope in upstream, midstream and downstream, but I do think that the pace of digital transformation can be faster. What additional measures do we need to take that will transform the availability, affordability and accessibility of energy while respecting the dynamics of markets and the entrepreneurial spirit that we want to nurture? I look forward to the forum and participants to come up with focused and result-oriented suggestions that will help us address the above thought-provoking questions. I would request KPMG to synthesize and reflect the emerging thoughts and suggestions to me. Prime Minister Modi's goal of transforming life of our people by providing them an equitable access to clean and affordable energy will continue to remain basis of building new India. I will ask you to deliberate on the concrete actions that the government can and should take to address the residual challenges and present me with summary inputs that can help refine our energy and resource roadmap. I wish ENRich 2018 all success and look forward to constructive outcome from the deliberation of the day. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. That was inspiring. Not the first time, as I mentioned, that we have been inspired by his thoughts, his vision. I must share a personal experience from very recently, where I was in the northeast in the Numaligarh refinery, and they're building a whole pipeline infrastructure and everything along with it, and the refinery expansion. And the amount of positive energy, the amount of enthusiasm which we have seen come into that part because of the infrastructure assets, oil and gas infrastructure assets which are being created and have been created, including the Indradhanush pipeline network, is just there to be seen. So when we are looking at real transformation of that area basis, the investments which are being proposed over there, and the thrust of government of India in those areas. Of course, you have mentioned other areas like Ujjwala, Bio-CNG. We've talked about some of them. We are going to speak about more of them. For this audience, we have the polls opening once after the minister's session is over. The polls will open up session by session. So do participate, because some of the questions the minister has asked are actually going in some form or fashion. They are there up there. So we would want your feedback on those online polls on your apps. So please download the ENRich apps if you have already not done that. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, ENRich is not a static community. It's a community which will work through the year together, online and offline. And Minister has given very clear indications what he expects from us in the speech over there. We will want to engage with this community to take that whole process forward together and feed policymaking, the whole policymaking system back with credible and incisive inputs. So thank you again, sir, for again inspiring us today. We're going to have the release of the digital thought leadership paper, which KPMG, my colleagues, have written up, and Vesha, Aanchal, Santosh, all of them have worked very hard towards that. We're going to take this opportunity with the minister to release the thought leadership paper. Is going to go up to the digital lounge. We're going to take just a changeover break and then come back with the next panel, where what we intend to do is actually, my colleague Nilay Verma will be conducting that panel. We have some very eminent speakers over there, or panelists over there. And what we will do is to keep it as a conversation and actually go into those issues which the Honorable Minister has raised before us. And let's take that forward as a journey. Thank you, sir. Thank you again very much for being with us. Please, may I ask you to rise up and join your hands together for the minister. So we'll just, please be at your seats. We're going to get on the panel for the last session, the last pre-lunch session at this point of time. That's actually going to focus on the theme of energy security and geopolitics. Now, I think the minister made a very interesting observation about the 10%, and if you've taken that nuance, he's talked about the 10% reduction in imports. And now that can come from two parts. One is, of course, having the overall basket of Indian production going up, which I'm sure we must try, and we have some panelists who have been contributing to that. But also looking at alternate ways of reducing the overall hydrocarbon consumption, which will then help us reduce imports. So to talk about all of those things, I'm now going to request Nilay Verma, my colleague, to come over. I'm also going to request Mr. Atanu Chakrabarti. He was the Director General of Hydrocarbons till recently, and he will be chairing the session. Mr. Sudhir Mathur, hello. He will be joining us. So, Nilay, whenever you're ready, we are ready. So, why don't you come over and, along with your panel, to the table. Mr. Nilay, you have the names of the panelists.
Yes,
so
I have.
You could just call them over.
Thanks, Anish. If I could request our esteemed panelist members to come up on the stage. Mr. Atanu Chakrabarti, Mr. Sudhir Mathur, Matt Gleason, Dr. Ritu Mathur, and Mr. Rajiv Mathur. We do have something for Mr. Mathur's here. If I could request them to come out on the stage, please. Come, Matt. Yeah, come. We need one more chair. It's okay, don't worry. Yeah, that's okay. Come, sit. We'll just wait for Mr. Chakrabarti to come in. But why don't you sit down? That's okay, don't worry. That's okay, go ahead. Yeah, that's okay, go ahead. Come. Mr. Mathur is there. Let me help you. That's it. While we do wait for Mr. Atanu Chakravarti to join us, I just wanted to start. I was told that I'm the moderator of this, so therefore I don't get to make speeches. So I'm going to make it very, very brief introduction. But just to lay out why we are talking about this subject. We all know that India is the third largest consumption of energy, just behind US and China. We also know that 80% of our oil is imported. Half of our gas is, 1/4 of our coal is. And the reality is, every projection, the minister spoke about 3 times in 2040. There are other projections 2 times. But every projection seems to suggest that actually the consumption of energy is going to increase rapidly in the next 10, 15 years. And yet we have seen very little examples of growth in domestic production. We have seen, let's say in the last 4 years, coal go up by about 100 metric tons. Welcome, sir. But the reality is, even in that growth, our import continues to be fairly significant. I think in the context of that, we also want to introduce the fact that renewables clearly is going to make a difference. India around the world is moving in that direction, and therefore the aspect of storage becomes extremely important. And when you're talking about storage, we're also talking about lithium ion. And therefore, should we not also be looking at, when we're talking about energy security, lithium as well as rare earth? I mean, we already see examples of China investing in Chile in trying to make sure that some of those things are happening. So clearly, we've got a lot to discuss. It's also true that a lot of initiatives have been taken. We heard the minister spoke about many of the initiatives, and we are extremely happy to have the person who actually did most of those initiatives, Mr. Atanu Chakravarti, with us. With this, let me just quickly introduce the panelists before we get talking. As I mentioned, Mr. Atanu Chakravarti, he is currently the Secretary to the Government of India, one of the finest and forward-looking bureaucrat that I have worked with. He was formerly the head of the Director General of Hydrocarbon. He's also been the Managing Director for GSPL, and therefore understand the sector not just from a policy perspective, but also as an operator and somebody who's run a large business. Dr. Ritu Mathur is from TERI. She's a director with TERI and has done a lot of work on low carbon, on policy modeling around energy and environment. We've also got Mr. Rajiv Mathur, who's an executive director for planning for GAIL, somebody who's led a number of programs in infrastructure programs in GAIL, and he was also the previous managing director for the gas company here in Delhi. Matt brings in a completely different perspective. Matt is based out of Sydney. He's the vice president for Oracle and has spent more than 20 years in the energy sector looking at large transformation, and brings in a very different perspective to this approach. And last but not the least, Mr. Mathur is the CEO of Cain, has been with Cain for some time now, and has worked across leadership positions in many organizations, including Dial, IDEA, and many other organizations. So let's get started, and we'll try and do 1 or 2 rounds of discussion before we open up the floor for questions from the audience. But sir, if I could start with you. You heard the minister, and there is this belief that while we are looking at enhancing the production, the growth of India is actually going to be the other way around. Our energy security becomes worse off with the growth that we are projecting. So what role do you see for the Indian public sector, because it is dominated by the Indian public sector, in making sure that the challenges that we see today can be addressed?
Thanks, Nila. You really put shackles once you say that only one sector's role should be seen and not in the entirety, especially when people like Sudhir are sitting here who contribute very substantially. However, we are today, in terms of energy security, do look at the vulnerability that we have when we get to source our primary energy requirement. Fossil fuel being the one, because coal having its own limitations, and renewables still not going up to the size that they will go, and even if they go up, there would be limitation. fossil fuel being the primary driver for us, to an extent would expose us to the vulnerability given our import levels for hydrocarbons. If we sort of look at the way world has panned out the consumption, we are third today, but by a margin. We're really the bronze medalists because we are at 5%, 5.6% roughly, and China stands somewhere at 23%. Even if it's, let's take it, they are inefficient, but we have a large population as big as theirs. Per capita consumption, if we see, and the kind of growth that we are aiming at, beyond the realm of 7%, we need to have per capita consumption and the total consumption that will go up. We are talking about, just now Anish was referring to consumption restrictions. We can't have an overall consumption restriction. There would be consumption restriction in the sense of improving efficiency on a per unit basis to produce the same good if we consume less of energy. Similarly, even for producing power, we should be consuming less of whatever fuel we are driving at, and so on and so forth. Perhaps that on the margins will give us something that is where energy security and efficiency tend to go together. Again, accessibility. If we do not make it, and this government really has done a lot towards accessibility, starting from schemes like Ujala, Saubhagya, and so on and so forth. There are a number of schemes which have really taken the clean energy or the type of energy which is appropriate to the last person. All that again increases the consumption. If we are going to take power to the last household, which is now happening, I was just seeing a number, 2.3 crore households connected in last about 13-14 months or so. That's a big number. Now, all that is going to increase our consumption. And as I was mentioning, despite our having a policy which is very, very open, and in the sense I would say that very encouraging for RE, again, hydrocarbon at the end of the day would continue to play its role, a very dominant role, let's put it, during the period running up to 2030 to 2035 or so. Even if we bring in EVs, we bring in all such things that can possibly be brought in. Having said that, that would only mean that we need to very seriously look at reducing imports. Salami slice it to say by saying that reduce it by 10%. Why not be more ambitious? Reduce it by 20%. Part of it could be reduced by bringing in REs, efficiency and all. But as I said, at the end of the day, the absolute numbers are too big, too huge, and would mean much larger reduction. Here there have been certain policy measures that have been taken. But two things which, since you mentioned public sector, and public sector brings with us the thought of commanding heights and monopolies and sort of bringing in certain amount of control in the system. Therefore, the first comment that I would like to have is that the public sector, especially the one dealing with energy, especially oil and gas in India, must get used to go by the market and itself try to drive the market design for hydrocarbons. Market design for hydrocarbon both on the crude side or on the gas side today have a lot of gaps. While we do say that petrol, diesel, all these things are marked to the market, but any efficient market would take out a lot of inefficiencies, and there's a whole load of inefficiency on the marketing side. Let me be very frank about it. And unless there's more competition would mean lesser regulation, lower prices, more efficiencies, both on sourcing side as well as on the delivery side. People would get, at the end of the day, we are talking about the consumer who is going to consume, try to become more efficient. So market design on crude side and on gas side, perhaps far more important. The gas market, which needs to grow if we really want to meet COP21 targets, and also as the main balancing fuel between our transition from coal to RE, it's a gas which is going to provide the balance. And gas we have to produce within country, and I can tell you there are whole loads of gas availability within the country, and it will meet the market only if there is an efficient market design. To my mind, it could only be driven if the public sector is willing to drive, rather than trying to skim the market by doing a very little bit of sales, but whatever they have, try to sell at a higher price, rather than go for volumes, let everybody enter, and go for lower prices and large volume kind of a strategy. If I try to put it very simplistically, perhaps things are a little bit more complicated than that. I guess that is the core message, Nilay, if I have for, since you mentioned specifically public sector, I will not sort of monopolize more of time. Perhaps there are many other issues that will come.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. You spoke about public sector, and I wanted to come to Sudhir, who represents private sector, and the role that the private sector can play. I mean, some would argue today's position that we are in, if I was to be provocative, is because public sector, while they've done brilliant, have not been able to deliver to energy security. So what is the role that you see for private sector, and how can private sector participation further increase?
Oh, first, let me compliment the public sector. 20% of our employees come from the public sector, and they do a brilliant job. And it's probably the inefficiency of the processes and systems which have to be removed. I don't think the issue lies with the individuals there. They still attract the best talent in the company, in the country, and they do a wonderful job. So the shackle is around systems, processes. As the minister, I think in the first meeting with CII said, this country is driven by CBI, CVC, and CAG. So I think we have to unshackle that part of it to let the public sector thrive. I think some of the changes that the minister and which were done in the recent past, and when Mr. Chakravarti was DGH, are being very, very transformative. Let me talk about that. I'll speak about upstream only for the moment. Unifying the license between various kinds of hydrocarbons, which we did. I remember I used to go and talk to Mr. Chakravarti a lot, and to the secretary, and to the minister about how we can move a lot faster if these things were removed. And, I would say without much success, right, in the existing blocks. But when we saw the new, the HELP hydrocarbon policy that came out, the new HELP OLP, everything was gone. So, much as at a time when you thought that, you're banging your head against a wall, but I think they heard every part of it, and it's been a very, very impressive change. So I think between these two changes, I think, you would see a significant amount of investments to follow, and, and a big change in the oil and gas play, a few years from now. Exploration to production is a time-consuming effort that we all know. I don't think there is dearth of capital. I think the risk is huge. It's a 0-1 risk. Finding, on an average, if you get 15% probability, then is out of that 15% what you can commercialize. So I think again in the recent past, the DSF round is going to play a huge role in creating new, maybe small entrepreneurs who will understand the risk of the commodity cycle from production, from development to production, and will create a risk appetite to get back into exploration. That's how, if you look at the history of Cain, it started off with nothing. 22.5% stake in Rava, which was producing 3,000 barrels. So even if you get 3 successes like that, I think we are home and dry. But the issue really lies in developing to attract more private sector capital. I guess every Indian big business house is already well invested the business they want to be, and moving away into this kind of a business is a lot more unknown. It's a lot more uncertain. So I don't know how much risk appetite really exists in India. So the key really lies in, being able to attract global majors and independent companies. And, unless we have people like that, it's very difficult for a service industry to thrive. I think the education institutes around upstream, downstream, both are fantastic in this country, produce a lot of talent which goes abroad. But attracting them, I think is not easy, because you're competing with the world's greatest geologies or countries which have ease of doing business. I feel very proud we've moved up, substantially in ease of doing business. But, there are enough players who think that they're better off in the US, even though the cost of production may be $40 a barrel. Because it's very easy to do business there. So, on one axis, you're competing on that front. On the other axis, you're competing with geological abundance, proven geological abundance. I wouldn't say India is very much there in geology. That's why we've been bidding quite assertively. And unless we unlock that equation, it's difficult to attract capital. And capital, as we've seen in the other forms of energy, it's been a little easier, I would say, in the unconventionals. But even if you look at power, most countries in the world would get, would raise capital, debt, with a 20-year door-to-door maturity, average maturity of 10 years. It's very difficult, and that's what it really takes to pay off. So, and here the laws are, partially the laws, partly the risk appetite to take a 20-year bet is not there. And then if you get caught in a refinancing situation, it can be disastrous for all and the entire equity capital. And I think principal shareholders are shying away from that risk at the moment. Same is true of oil and gas. With the commodity volatility, price volatility, you will need a much longer horizon. Exploration has to come out of equity. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But when you look at, we've seen prices 120, 30 in 6 months, 40 to 85 in, within 8 weeks, then falling back. That volatility is very difficult to, absorb. If countries can't do it, let alone what a company can do. A company is right side of decimal place. I think, I think what really needs to, 2 or 3 things. I think the gas trading hub, providing market pricing, same with crude, would attract a lot of investment. I think what would also attract investment is if the revenue sharing contracts can be for 30 years compared to 20, because a lot of the lending or equity raising in the world happens on the basis of reserves. And reserves is nothing more than how much you can produce over the life of a contract. That allows you to borrow. So instead of 20 years, which are currently there, you make it 30, your reserves are higher, you'll be able to raise capital that much more easily. So I think these 2 changes, I could have said a lot if you had asked me this question about a year back. But I think the changes that have been made and, for which we are very grateful and really appreciate the forward thinking, have really reduced the ask from the industry.
No, I completely agree. As somebody who's been associated with the DSF round and the fact that first time we got engaged and worked with DGH there, the question that we asked was there will be no entry barriers. So technically we were able to bring in new set of entrepreneurs who have, and there's been early success in that round, and I think that really opens up the market as we move forward. But if I could just now switch subject, and Matt, if I could bring you in, very often when you talk to an energy company about precious resources, they always talk about oil, gas, coal. But you differ. You think data is the precious resource. And I think you need to explain that, because that's not naturally what people think about.
Right, yeah. And I guess coming from a country which is a big exporter of resources, Australia, I perhaps am a turncoat by sitting in the panel and talking about decreasing imports here in India. But there's 2 things that really, in a data-centric world, utilities, regulators, consumers can all contribute to the energy supply security. One of them is we build energy supply globally to cater for the high tide mark, the days of peak demand, the days of peak load. We're building, every year we have 8,760 hours. We're building to cater for 300 of those. And by doing that, we're building up an extra capacity level that means the energy we consume, the resources we need, are all built to a different capacity. Now, if we can use data to derive what it is that drives those peak days, help us to forecast, to level that out, to change consumer behaviours, that's where your saving comes in terms of a growth population, an incrementing electrification of the nation. But now I don't have to build 15% higher than my need because I can actually build and balance out that need so that I'm just building effectively for the capacity load I'm going to need 8,400 days of the year instead of 8,760 hours of the year. Sorry. That's the challenge I think that data can solve. If you can't solve it with data, you can't solve it with anything. It's not the quality of the resource that supplies the energy at the beginning of the acquirement process. It's not the consumer behaviour at the end of the process. It's the connection between the whole stream that happens along that journey. And so one of the things that we get very involved with, apart from the aspects of planning grid, the aspects of planning generation capacity and that growth of population and how those grid players are going to take a place on the usage across that network, is actually involving the consumer in that and actually having them be a part of driving a cultural, a behavioural change and allowing them to be participators in helping level out those peak loads. And it's really only then when you can actually have the benefits of being able to, as an energy-intensive growth country, be able to then make predictive and growth decisions which don't attach you to building 10%, 15%, 20% greater than current demand so that you can be confident that you're not going to be press splashed across the front newspaper, that you're not going to be held to account for brownouts or days of zero supply to new electrified parts of the nation, etc. So I do think data is probably the most undervalued resource in the whole discussion about resources. It is the way that you can actually manage that capital investment a whole heap with a decreased entry cost. To build generation plants is a very expensive exercise. To use data to avoid or to de-accelerate the rate at which you need to build generation capacity is relatively cheap, relatively. But it is a matter of thinking about behavioural science, thinking about consumer behaviours, thinking about better grid management and all of those things.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's clearly a different way to look at it. But if I can come to you, Rajiv, Mr. Chakravarty spoke about the importance of gas. But there is also, a world over, there's a transition from coal towards gas. Now, can that constrain our own objective of reaching up to 20% mix, given that the world is actually shifting towards gas as well?
Okay, so let me put it in this manner. If you look at the energy mix in the world, gas has about 24% or so share in the entire energy mix. In India, we have about 6 or 6.5%. So if we have to have a quantum jump of 4 times over with a 7 or 8% GDP growth, that is a very substantial, tall number that we are looking at. I think what the government has been aiming at today is about 15% or so, which also is a laudable, target to meet. So a lot of efforts are required to be done in this manner. On the upstream side, as rightly put, people need to get the right price for being incentivized to produce more. On the midstream side, a lot of infrastructure needs to be created for people to exercise their choice. Today, what has happened is we have about 12,000 or 13,000 kilometers of trunk pipelines, mostly spread in western and northern and central part of the country, eastern and southern states and central India, almost devoid of this option now. So people don't even have the choice to exercise that option of using gas. So what the government is doing is, as the minister rightly put, creating pipelines in eastern part, northeastern, connecting them with southern grid. So idea is to connect all the sources with all the consuming centers, the large consuming centers, and then create hubs and distribution networks. As a result of the 700 districts, I think 400 districts will have localized distribution networks in place. That's when people will have a choice to exercise whether to use gas or not. And if you make that available with the attributes that gas has, I'm sure people will be looking at opting for that. So that will increase the share of gas as we go along. And then, in the next couple of years, the kind of investments that are being talked about, 70,000 crores of rupees in localized distribution networks, and then the trunk transmission lines that are being laid, another 40,000 crores. And then, the ancillary industries and, the users and all which will have to be coming up. So all that entails maybe more than 100,000 crores of investment in the next couple of years. If we want to take the share from 6 to maybe 10, 12, or reach closer to the 15% number. Of course, we will have to deliver the gas efficiently. Pricing will have to be right. Consumers should derive some value out of paying more, because the producer also needs incentive to produce. Same time, the consumer needs to derive a certain value if he is paying for that product. Also, we may have to get used to non-subsidized, kind of an environment where people pay the real price. That's where you will discover the share of gas going up much more than where we are today. So,
very right. Dr. Mathur, if I could come to you, we haven't spoken about energy efficiency. And it's somewhat not spoken very regularly, but there are estimates that it can make a big difference in trying to reduce the intensity. What's your view? What have you found, and what do we need to do to make that a much more meaningful discussion from a policy perspective?
Yeah, so I think, again, as the Minister mentioned, I think India is going to see very robust growth, and we hope that would materialize anyway. Some recent statistics also sort of positions India today at where China was in the year 2004. So if you look at it, the way we are headed out to grow as an economy is a challenge for the country in terms of the kinds of energy that we may be requiring out into the future. And energy efficiency, therefore, I think has a key role to play, though I wouldn't say it's the only bullet, as the dampener to our growth. Whatever I think we can do to dampen the rate of growth is going to be extremely important. Again, I think particularly from the two bullets of our NDC, which are related to energy, in terms of looking at the energy emissions intensity and in terms of looking at the share of what non-fossils can do. So again, there I think energy efficiency is going to be a key player and needs to be a key player in trying to allow India to keep to its targets. Some of the study we've done at TERI also indicates that different sectors are going to play out very differently. So, and also the choices what we have in terms of energy efficiency can vary quite significantly. So it's important to look at where you can do, where you get the maximum bang for the buck, and sort of target your energy efficiency improvement challenges towards that. Having said that, again, energy efficiency per se on the end use side is one thing. But I think we are seeing a transformation in the energy sector which is way beyond and different from what we've seen in the past 2 decades. I think the kind of energy options we're going to have are going to see use of very different kind of resources, very different kinds of materials, very different kinds of land, water, etc. being used. And therefore, I think it's a larger understanding of efficiency that we need to have, not only from an energy perspective, but also from a resource perspective. And that is where I agree data becomes very important. Also techniques of how you look at things, whether you look at the life cycle of the entire chain of what you're using and consuming, all of that becomes very important. Behavior becomes very important in trying to track and trying to manage what people consume, where they consume, when they consume. So I think for India, it's a challenge not only in terms of the scale, in terms of the magnitude of energy requirements that we are going to have, but also being able to plan for what and where we sort of do in the short, medium, and longer term. So I think I'll stop with that for now.
No, absolutely. I know I'm cognizant of time, and I want to make sure that we give time for the audience to ask questions. But before we do that, sir, if I could ask one more question. Now, as the Secretary Deepam now, you do manage the equity investments of the central government as well as disinvestments of the CPSEs. Do you see global asset acquisition from India being part of the strategy to be able to reduce or to manage some of the concerns that we have in terms of energy security?
Well, in a lighter vein, certainly listing OVL and taking some money out. Yes. All along, actually, since the onset of the previous century, most of the countries have tried to access wherever hydrocarbon was. Most of the ships, when they moved on to diesel and other fuels, they were trying to look for areas where hydrocarbon was more easily available. And flag went along with it. If we see the last commodity cycle, China moved, and India also right from 90s has been trying to source whichever place we have been able to do. However, that does get limited by whether we can bring the molecule back to the country. A lot of people say that molecule is $1, so you bring $. Now, if I have to really earn $, I'll look for a return on $1 in a very, very different fashion and invest somewhere else. So till I have a surety of the molecule for that investment, because that investment is essentially for energy security. The things don't really pan out till the full molecule comes back to the country. Till now, we have not been able to do as much as we are wanting to do, but certainly there is no reason why it cannot be done. In our neighborhood, let's pick up Bangladesh, though their fields are waning, but I'm sure with new techniques, the likes of Cairn can certainly go there and use EOR techniques and bring Bangladesh gas into the main part of India and where it can be consumed, and so forth. Even Myanmar gas through a pipeline can come to India. So there are myriad opportunities which are open to going abroad, but it must follow the dictum that the molecule must come back. If it doesn't come back, frankly, it doesn't serve the purpose, because the dollar return is not something that one is looking at in that sense, because then there is taking the dollar out. It's much better invested here, where again there's dearth of capital investment in this sector. Just now Mr. Mathur was talking about the equity investment in this, and we need loads of equity investment in all sectors, all across. And I'll just sort of take on from where she has just talked about energy efficiency. The smart way in which public sector, since you asked the previous question about public sector, could tackle it. In fact, they have been doing, ONGC is planning to source, I understand, CO2 from one of the thermal plants and use it for a CO2 lift in one of its oil fields, both in West Coast near Gandhar as well as in Tamil Nadu. That leads to CO2 sequestration, efficient usage of a lift at very low energy, because they had to spend a lot of money on that. Similarly, they have a lot of platforms, offshore platforms, which could be used for wind energy, for example. Now, there the efficiency really kicks in, because you don't again construct a new platform, you just put in a wind farm, just put down a cable to carry the thing back. So sustainability, efficiency, security, everything, they tend to move together. Unless there is a convergence on these, we will not be able to sort of provide for the kind of growth that we are looking at.
Absolutely. Extremely relevant. With this, I would open up the questions to the audience. We do have some mics here, so please do raise. If you can bring the mic here, we have a question here. Just in the interest of time, to make the point brief. Yeah, thank you. If you speak in it'll get activated. No.
investment. So you really price the gas, giving them a return on investment, not linked to the market price of gas. I think it could be a captivity, there could be a captive element in this. There will be an element of transportation definitely. And then you can also have, it's really going from a competitive bidding to at least looking at gas bringing back to India on an investment return basis, an actual cost of producing gas.
While clearly we're not here from a policy perspective, but if you do have any comments, sir, or Mr. Mathur, please, if you would want to comment on that.
Point is well taken. We can suggest it to the policy makers and see what happens.
Would you want to comment, sir?
To put it very mildly, I would be violently opposed to any such incentivization which distorts the market. That's the first thing I'd mention for any reform which is needed. If one has to incentivize and create jobs, we'll do it on the Mother Earth. We should be doing it here. Rather than take an equity, give it a fixed return. No equity gets a fixed return. It takes a risk. Therefore, anything which distorts the market by two pricing systems, by incentivizing something where the capital flies out of the country, I don't think would find favor.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, no, I know we're running behind time, but if there's any other question, otherwise I have one round of questions. Okay, I don't think we have any, sorry, we do have one question, so.
See, I'm Raghuraman. The question is one of volatility. When you have expectations and the tariffs are going down, earlier it was the case that it was going up, and all the time financing and everything was based on a certain escalation. But today you find that we are in a situation where it's going down. So how do you think that financing will happen, especially to look at this volatility and the energy security, which requires a long-term view, which means that we need to build up the right kind of things to say exactly where we will invest, even if we lose in the short term. Is it going to happen in this kind of polity which we have?
Sudhir, do you want to take that? You spoke about financing.
It's difficult. It's an investor appetite issue. Who wants to take how much risk? But eventually, the equity component of the financing structure is meant to take care of the volatility, and a fixed return, is ends up, servicing the debt. So volatility will be there, and there are, people invest behind much lower margin, like you saw, like we see in unconventionals. But it's a steady annuity return. There are people who love, commodity price risk. For example, I'm not saying I do personally, but if you look at us, we never cover for crude prices. And I remember a South African company which was in the gold business, and the management and the board took an approval, for a resolution at the AGM to the shareholders to say we should be allowed to hedge. And the shareholders shot it down. It's a very large South African company. And they said, look, we have invested behind the volatility. Who are you to tell us to get, to hedge this risk? So I think, I mean, in our business, I mean, I'm assuming if, you're, or any upstream company that is listed, the shareholders have a right and the flexibility to go and hedge for volatility in the market. They don't need the company. The company is required for the purpose of efficiency and growth. Commodity price can be hedged separately. So shareholders will not, want to invest behind it.
Thank you. If I could just, as I end, and maybe I'll start with you, and this is the same question for all the panelists. And again, a question that let me just still ask. If you were to rate on a scale of 10, Anish spoke about polling. If you were to rate on a scale of 10, how confident you are that with the measures that the government has taken and the next decade, are we looking at a secure, becoming better as far as energy security is concerned, or are we going to be worse off? And any one specific suggestion that you would have that we should do it? Again, Sudhir, if I could start with you, and then we'll go around.
It's difficult to put it on an absolute scale, but compared to the past decade, I think the next decade is significantly superior. I think what the role the government and the private sector has played, and the public sector, especially in unconventional, is unparalleled.
Sure.
And it's making a huge difference. On suggestions, two fronts, I think, of course, there is the coal issue and the thermal power that we need to unlock, and I think it requires some very strong, decisive actions to be taken without worrying about political outcomes of that, because the country really needs energy. And the other is also, I think, as Matt and Mr. Chakravarti both, we need efficient distribution systems or consumption systems. I think, a smart grid that allows you pricing of power based on sheer availability. If it's a low availability, it's going to go away in any case. So you may as well sell it for 2 rupees. And if we can, at least in urban India, in rural India it may time, to tie it in with some kind of a SIM card that, if I have set it at 2 rupees, it switches on my washing machine or my dishwasher, will change the entire consumption pattern. I think we need to getting concerned about efficiency at that level.
That's true. Matt?
I think it's an exceptionally well-made point. In terms of scoring on a 1 to 10 scale, I think the answer is yes. But I think what we have to remember is the growth in the drive of the electrification of this nation is driven by the consumer. Right? It's a need and it's a desire of the government and it's a desire of the people to have electricity, to be able to consume electricity, to be able to have appliances to do those things. Never ever plan grid networks without thinking about the consumer outcome. That's the critical part of any plan that you make. And if you can ensure that you don't slip that mindset, I think success chances are extremely high. For all those reasons that we can engage consumers in helping drive down the demand in the periods where we least want them to be consuming. Be cautious about thinking that appliances are the answer. Appliances aren't bought every day, but electricity is consumed every day. So we need to actually think about behavioural patterns as opposed to purchasing patterns.
Bye.
Well, Nilay, look at the higher end, considering that the way policies have unfolded, and hopefully there has been a bipartisan support towards it, short of politics. I guess across the board, perhaps labels change, but the inherent part of the policy structure, I don't think would change, and that should push things. However, there are two things. We have a basic issue of not adequate equity capital in the country. And on the other side, the debt market is not deep enough. Now, these are the two, if you ask me the worrying point, these are the two worrying points. And if you ask me, power sector got afflicted on this count than anything else. Though we try to sources toward discoms and consumer and those kind of prices, frankly, if you ask me. At the end, it comes down to this. And Mr. Mathur had actually at quite a length explained this. These are the two things. If there was a bond market available for me to go and do a 20-year bond and that kind of a thing, perhaps things would have been easy. But there is no bellwether rate other than the GSEC rates that are available. So we are planning to do a debt ETF, which possibly could become a bellwether, and then have in general retail participation of people in the bond market, which in India today is not possible. Again, on the ETFs, on the private side, again they can start participating in the equity without bothering about the individual risk, but just the systemic risk. I guess these are the two things. If ETFs are pulling up in the country through passive investing on the equity side, and if possibly at a point of time, if the bond market is much more open and RBI pushes it harder, I guess you will see the growth rates far beyond what we are seeing today. Let's hope on that front.
Absolutely. I just assume, sir, being a civil servant, the rating would be 10. Dr. Mathur.
Again, I think in terms of comparing with the last decade, I would rate it towards the high end of the higher side. We are becoming more energy secure in a way, I would say. And in terms of what it would take to sort of continue that energy security, I again think it's much to do in terms of what our electricity generation sector would be able to maintain by way of its tariffs that it would need to charge and what the consumers might need to draw. So I think that's the thin and delicate and dynamic balance that I think we are going to see unfolding very differently in the coming decade, and that is where I think we need to focus our attention, whether storage comes in or not, and whether coal or gas or something else does the balancing act. I think that is where the main challenges would lie.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would put it in this manner that if you look at the last decade or so, we've come a long way and a lot has already been done, but a lot more needs to be done going forward in the next couple of years. I would, for the immediate future and low-hanging fruits kind of a thing, I would say if you want to really bring down the distortions in the kind of fuels and the efficiency, etc., something needs to be done on the taxation front. For example, some fuels are out of the GST, some are in. If those distortions are removed, maybe they'll bring in more efficiency into the system, better choice for people to exercise, etc., etc.
Thank you so much. I think on that really optimistic note, but recognizing the challenges that we have, we would close this session, and I would really appreciate for a big round of applause for our panelists. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nila, and the panel for that discussion. I could sense, I missed part of it, I must admit, but I sensed the optimism in the end and the precision in the end in the thoughts. So it definitely would have been very enriching for this audience. We now have a small token of appreciation for the panel over here. So if some of my colleagues could get the mementos, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. In Delhi, sir.
Lovely box.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I know you like it. Matt, this is for you to take back home. I don't think Australia is going to allow that going inside, but still we'll try.
We'll grow it for him over here in India.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
the polls are open. So as you
If you
mentioned
can just come together
yesterday
for a picture.
earlier, it's important that we have your feedback. So please respond. Lunch is going to be served here as well as upstairs. So some of you who have breakout sessions upstairs could even have lunch upstairs as well. Otherwise, of course, you're most welcome to have it over here. We are running a little behind time, but we'll start latest by 2:30, no later than that, at the respective breakouts. The first breakout, which is on decarbonization, will be upstairs. The second breakout, which is on the stressed assets, will be here, and the third will be upstairs again in the next to the digital lounge. That's a digital session. So post lunch, each of you make your choices of your session, and we see you there. Please join us for lunch.
Yes. I hope you found the session. I hope you found the session